Okay, so we're in the share we're talking about. We made a little start on this last week, and the subject is waiting between tavshilim, and we um, we started out by saying that if one ate a tavshil of basar, we saw this actually um, inside the Shulchan Aruch. That if one ate a tavshil of basar, which as opposed to basar itself, and the Shulchan Aruch, he said, was very makil on this. He said if you ate a tavshil of basar, it's mutar to eat a tavshil of cheese afterwards, and washing hands in between is optional. The Ramah comments that there are those that require washing, um, and but if one wants to eat cheese after a tavshil of meat, we eat actual cheese or meat after a tavshil of cheese, there is an obligation to wash hands in between. So meanwhile, the Shulchan Aruch is stating this, that you have to be makbid about washing your hands in between. And meanwhile, the rest of us are sitting here like stunned and saying, "Whoa, you can actually." He's saying like you can basically have milchika coffee after eating a chollent potato. Okay, so. Um, so the Ramah comes in and says, look, we're not quite this makil. He says the fat. First of all, he points out that the fat of the meat has the din of meat, and it's our custom to be machmir and therefore wait 6 hours, and not to eat cheese after a tavshil of meat in the same way as we wait after eating meat itself. So the Ramah says our minhag is to be machmir on this. Okay, one should not deviate from this custom nor break the fence and be poretz geder. Poretz geder is, as I said last week, that's code when you hear that's the minhag.
Yeah, I'm here, by the way. I'm eating something, so
Yeah, no problem.
I don't want everyone to get hungry, so
you'll turn us off our suppers.
Yeah.
Okay. However, if there's no meat in the tavshil, and this is quite a practical point, which was there's no meat in the tavshil, rather it was just cooked in a meaty pot, then it is mutar to eat cheese afterwards, and there's no need to be machmir. There's no custom anywhere to be machmir. So this is the case of where parava was cooked in a fleshik pot. So you used your fleshik pot to cook some rice, and now you eat the rice. And is there any reason why you can't have milchiks afterwards? Absolutely none. It's totally mutar to have milchiks after cooking in the fleshik pot, cooking parava in the fleshik pot. Okay. The Ramah also continues. It's also the custom to eat meat after a tavshil of cheese or milk. In other words, you can have meat after milk. However, one should wash hands in between. Okay, and although one didn't eat meat, and even though you didn't eat any meat, washing must still be done between a tavshil of meat and tavshil of cheese if they were handled. Okay, only those eating need to wash between milk and meat, but the waiters don't need to. So if you've got people serving you at the table and they're not actually eating, and they're changing over from milk to meat, then they actually don't have a chiyuv to wash. It's only the people who are eating. But that's a kind of side thing, which is perhaps more culturally appropriate to the times that the halacha was written in. Okay, and let me just see. This is. Yeah, so that's Sif Gimel. We'll come back to Sif Dalad later. Okay, so there's a bit here on Maim Emtzaim, which is washing in between the dishes. I'm not going to spend too much time dwelling on Maim Emtzaim, the middle waters, having to wash your hands between meat and milk. There's some, and just in my notes over here, there's some argument between Rabbeinu Shmuel and Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosfos, and I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on this particular halacha because I don't think it's that practical for us. So let's rather about they're talking about the intricacies of whether or not you have to wash your hands in between having meat and milk. When Lama said the reason why they're having this debate is because they're talking about the ikar adin of you could just wash your hands after the chollent potato and then go into milchiks, and we're not like the Rama to be strict about that we don't that we aren't going to allow to, we're going to treat it as if you just ate meat. Okay, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. The tavshil. Okay, so just to clarify the terms again, a tavshil is a food that was cooked with meat and has a meaty flavor. All right. So, for example, if you have eggs in your chollent, or if you have a potato in the chollent, these are things that even if you scrape off all of the gravy and whatever, the eggs, you know, an egg is actually a great example. I don't know if you put eggs in your chollent. I've done it a few times. It's actually really nice. I don't know why I don't do it more often. But the eggs are a good example because you can peel off the shell and you can be 100% sure there is no actual meat inside there. But if you've ever seen an egg from inside the chollent, it's gone brown. The shell is porous, so it does let in the flavor. So you don't have any actual meat, but you've certainly got some meaty flavor inside there. Okay, and but the same applies to any vegetables. But you know, an egg is more extreme example just because you can see what that there's definitely no meat in it. Okay. So, okay, sorry, somebody was speaking Arabic in my ear there. So the Taz, it brings a machlokes if you have soup, if it has the din of meat or a tavshil of meat. So you've got a chicken soup, okay, and the broth, just the broth. But obviously, you're not talking about the pieces of chicken inside the meat because that's obviously meat. Okay, so the Badei HaShulchan explains that since water doesn't have its own taste, therefore the taste of meat is the main taste, and it will be moshech tam. So therefore, if you had to eat just a plain chicken soup, just the broth without the actual meat, that would still make you fleishiks for 6 hours. But therefore because the taste of the meat is the main taste. Okay. Now, so looking again at the Shulchan Aruch, it's talking about a tavshil after a tavshil. From the fact that the Ramah only said that if one ate a tavshil of meat, one should do maimim tzayim in order to eat a tavshil of cheese, we can infer that kinoach and hadacha are not necessary. Remember kinoach and hadacha, that was the wipe and the wipe and the rinse. Okay, and we said that that was necessary if you wanted to go from milk to meat. There, you know, we are makil and say that that if you've just had some cheese, you can have meat immediately afterwards, but you should have kinoach and hadacha, wiping with something solid. In other words, eat a piece of bread or something that's going to take the taste and remnants of cheese from inside your mouth, and then rinse out with some liquid as well in your mouth before you move on to the meat. And you can even do that inside the same suda. If you have bread, you can have the cheese part first and then clear it off and kinoach hadacha and go into the meat. So there we said you need to have kinoach and hadacha. That's after actual milchiks that you're going on, and then you're going on to eat fleshiks. Now, if you're just eating a tavshil of meat, we were reverting back to what we said is the ikar din, which is that if you just like the Shulchan Aruch says that you could have that chollent egg and then immediately have milchik coffee or something like that afterwards, just by washing your hands, and no rinsing and wiping is necessary, according to what we're reading into the Ramah. But the Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that that's actually a bad inference. You should nonetheless, if you're following that, for those who follow the kula of being able to have the one tavshil after another, they should still do kinoach and hadacha. On the other hand, the more practical case of tavshil of cheese, if you ate a tavshil of cheese, so something that isn't actually majority milk but has a milky taste to it, and if you want to have meat afterwards, you only need to wash your hands afterwards. There's no need to do the whole kinoch and hadach if you don't actually have the fatty cheese inside your mouth there. Okay, so that's a practical thing that we can have over here, is that if for example you just had a cup of milk, like a coffee, and now straight away you want to go and have some meat, you just need to wash your hands to make sure that you don't have any milkshakes on your hands, and then you can go straight into it, and there's no need to have a rinse and wipe. So after having had all this discussion, the halacha l'maaseh for Sfardim, the Kaf HaChaim and the Yalkut Yosef bring the Beis Yosef that the minute of the Sfardim is to wait 6 hours to eat cheese even after eating a tavshil of meat. So even the Sfardim aren't makil like the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, and even to eat a tavshil of cheese, you need to wait 6 hours. Okay, Ashkenazim say, according to the Ramah, it's a minhag to wait 6 hours if you want to eat cheese after a tavshil of meat, and Rabbi Akiva Eiger brings the Minchas Yaakov in the name of Rashal, that even for a tavshil of cheese after a tavshil of meat, one should wait 6 hours. So it looks like, honestly, there's not much difference between the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. So even if the dish is minority meat, then you still keep your 6 hours until having milchiks. Okay, now referring to the point of that we touched on earlier, of the parava cooked in the fleishik pot. Okay, so we saw that the Ramah said that this was completely mutar if you ate the rice that was cooked inside a fleishik pot, and we're talking about a ben yomo pot, by the way. Have we spoken about ben yomo and eno ben yomo before?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay, so it's an important point to bring in to keep in mind. Ben yomo and eno ben yomo. Ben yomo is a pot that has been used in the last 24 hours. So if we haven't learned it before, I'm certain we'll come across it again later. But this is actually a very practical thing to keep in mind in your own kitchen, is that there's always a big distinction between ben yomo and eno ben yomo. If a pot was used within the last 24 hours, then it's got a real taste of meat or milk in it, whatever it was. And if it's then is used to cook something else, then we say that the taste has gone out. It went from the meat into the walls of the pot, and then from the walls of the pot into whatever was cooked in it afterwards. Okay, that's for the ben yomo, and that can cause problems. As for instance, if you cooked milk in a fleishik pot that is a ben yomo, everything is going to come out treif. The food, the pot, it's all a big mess up. But if the pot is an eno ben yomo, it means it has not been used for fleishiks. And I'm saying fleishiks just because it's easier than saying fleishiks or milchiks. So I'm gonna say it's a fleishik pot, but the same is true in the other direction. If a pot was not used for fleishiks in the last 24 hours, for hot fleishiks, and I'm saying, if it was not used for hot fleishiks in the last 24 hours, then even if you cooked milk in it, the taste that went into the walls of the pot is in the walls of the pot is considered a tamlif gum. It's a negative taste, and because it's a negative taste, when it goes into the milk, it doesn't improve it. It makes it worse, and therefore it is the milk or the milky whatever it is that you're cooking inside the pot is considered mutar. However, the pot will still need to be kashered, because now you've got milk and meat having been cooked into the walls of the pot, but the food itself will be edible. Okay, so we're talking here about even sort of reverting to the case where you cooked parava in the fleishik pot. Okay, so if you cook parava in the fleishik pot, then whatever's inside that pot is actually even if it was a ben yomo, and you eat that rice, you're not fleishik. There's no reason to be machmir. You can immediately have milchiks afterwards. We'll get into the discussion of whether you can have milchiks with it a little bit later. Okay. Okay. So this is talking about that was cooked in a meat pot that where the pot is totally clean, or actually the shach. Interesting. The shach says you would have thought that this is talking about where the pot is totally clean, but the shach is saying no. The Ramah is talking about food that was cooked in a fleishik pot, but the meat was not batel. meaning that there were actually still little bits of meat clinging to the edges of the pot when you cook the rice in it. So there was actual meat inside there. He said, what's the reasoning of the shach over here? He says, because if the pot was totally clean, then why do you even need to tell us that it's mutar to eat milk immediately afterwards? Okay, that's learned from another halacha in Siman Tzadihei. Okay, in that case, it says fish was cooked in a ben yomo meat pot, and yet the fish can be eaten with milk. Okay, so since we've learned the halacha over there, why do we need to teach it over here? Because the taste of meat is nut bar nut in the fish, and it's too weak to be considered meat. So in order that the Shulchan Aruch should not repeat itself, says the Rama, we must say that this case is different. And therefore, the meat in the tavshil is not even batel, but it doesn't have the din of basa bein shinaim and moshech tam because it's so little. It's not. You don't. Just a little bit of taste from the meat. It's such a little bit that's been cooked into this rice. And we've got our two reasons from the Rambam and Rashi, if you recall from a couple of weeks ago, is that. Oh, last week even we were talking about it, is the meat between your teeth according to the Rambam and the moshech tam according to Rashi, and neither of those cases is applicable, right? When we're talking about the chollent potato, the chollent egg, you might say, okay, it's a very strong taste of meat inside there, and therefore it's still moshech tam, and that's why we're machmir to treat it as a completely fleshix. But in this case, you barely even have a taste of meat inside this parava. So this is incredible heter that the shach is giving over here, that even if the pot wasn't properly cleaned before putting the rice into it, you can still have milchix afterwards. All right. So here, this amazing heter has practical application. In, for example, the case of a meat restaurant or like a falafel stand. Now, and the falafel stands, the falafel and shawarma shops, let's say. Okay, you've got places where they're cooking the shawarmas over here and the falafels over here and the chips and all being deep fried in oil and whatever. So now, even though okay, so if you go to the falafel stand but you don't eat fleshix, all you went is to the falafel and shawarma stand. So you got a bag of chips from and maybe a bit of salad from the stand. Now they're definitely not being makpid about where the meat's going and saying, oh no, we're going to keep this parava, we're going to keep this parava. Right? That you've seen them just shaving and throwing things onto the counter, and the place where they were chopping up the meat is where they also pour the chips and whatever. It's a whole balagan. But nonetheless, according to what the Rama is saying over here, since even though the salads and the dips are considered fleshik and cannot be eaten with milk, because perhaps a small amount of meat grease or tiny meat particles are still mixed up with it, it doesn't make you fleshik because it's such a small amount. That's based on this logic of the shach that we just mentioned above.
When you say small amount, are you saying less than a kazayas?
No, I'm saying a lot less than a kazayas. A lot less.
I'm
talking about where like a bit of meaty grease might have splashed into the chips.
Okay. All right.
And it doesn't even have to be like batal b'shishim, because batal b'shishim, well, I don't need to teach you. Batal b'shishim is that we don't even regard. We're saying like even if you could even say that even if the meat was being deep fried in the oil, and he deep fried a piece of meat in the oil and pulled it out, and now uses the same oil to make the chips. Those chips, you can't have those chips with milchix. But if you eat the chips, it doesn't make you fleshik.
But you can rinse out your mouth afterwards and then have something milkik.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. And even I'm not going to go into it, but there's an argument to be made that whether you even need to rinse out your mouth. Okay. Right. So having learned that nice little heter over there, let's talk about cutting an onion. Okay. So what's our situation? We got a knife, and the knife is used for fleshix, let's just say. Okay, so you got a fleshix knife, and and now you want to take an onion and cut it up. Now the thing with an onion is now we're also introducing the idea of a davar harif. So there are a couple of aspects of things that happen with cutting an onion. One is that the knife is being pushed hard into the onion. So you have a concept called durcha de sakina, the pressure of the knife. Okay, so that's one factor that's different from most other cases. The second thing is that the onion is called harif. And what is the effect of harif is that it improves the flavor of something even if it's not ben yomo. So now you have a dangerous situation where even if your knife is not a ben yomo, it was last used for fleischiks more than 24 hours ago, but it's now got real fleischiks and it's got fleischik taste inside it, and it now pushes into the onion. So it expels its taste from inside the knife and pushes it into the onion because you're pushing hard with the knife onto the onion. And now the onion takes the taste that was previously a tam lifgam in the knife and improves the flavor. Okay, so this means that the onion will now have the din of the knife with a single nosen tam. It's not called, and that's another chumrah, is that it's not even considered a nut bar nut. Remember, normally nut is nosen tam, it gives a taste. Okay, if you had fleischike taste into knife, you should say one nosen tam from the meat into the knife, and then one nosen tam from the knife into the onion. Okay, but what it does, because of the durcha de sakina, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Beis Meir, that's if they have the din of the same din as the knife itself. They take on as if it's a single nosen tam. Okay, but the chiddush of the Rama is that if a person eats an onion that was cut with a fleischike knife, or other spicy food that was cooked in a fleischike pot, he doesn't need to wait 6 hours to eat the cheese. So once again, you chop the onion with a meaty knife. Now you've got a meaty onion, and if you fry that inside a milchika frying pan, your frying pan is going to be treif. Okay, because that's a single taste of meat into the onion, and then and then that goes straight into your milchika frying pan, and your frying pan is treif.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the chiddush is that if let's say you chop up your onion, let's say making a red onion in for your salad, and you eat the salad, and you say, oh, I cut that onion with a fleischike knife, and now I want to have some cheese.
Right.
It's okay, you can. That's the chiddush of the Rama according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, because you don't really have a strong fleischike taste in the onion. You would not be allowed to put cheese in that salad with the onion. Okay, but if you eat the salad, then you're allowed to have cheese afterwards without a problem.
Just not together.
Just not together. Correct. Interestingly,
It's also true, as we learned, it's also true for onions, radishes, and there was one other. Right?
onions, radishes. Look, the one case, there's actually only one case that we know is definitely a davar harif. It's called chiltis, which is known in English as a safatida. Have you ever heard of a safatida?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen this in Mishnah.
Right.
Right. And a safatida, you hear the word in it, fetid. A safatida. It's a spice that grows in India, and it is extremely pungent, which I'm told is the characteristic of the north of India. They like the spicy stuff up north, and that is definitely considered davar harif. We're machmir about onions, and radishes apparently also are davar harif. We're machmir with onions. We tend to we try to be a little more. We try to be machmir with lemons, but I think there's a little more space for kulas with lemons.
Yeah.
even with onions, if you're in a tight spot, there's there are heterim.
Is there a difference in the onions, such as a red onion might be okay, but a regular onion is not, or a scallion or something?
Don't think
is
so.
prohibited? No. Okay.
Don't think so. I think although I may be wrong. I may be wrong. I've never seen a discussion on it, so it's quite possible that there's something that I'm unaware of there. So okay, I'll plead the fifth on that. What about between fish and meat? So we said before that between fish, that fish and meat we don't eat together because it was believed to be a sakana. So do you need to wash in between, rinse, wash your hands? Okay. So the Mechaber says it's a chov to have ma'im mutzayim, that to wash your hands in between. But the Mishnah Berurah holds that the minhag in our days is that it's enough to do kina hidacha. You don't need to wash your hands in between, just wipe and rinse. Because eating fish and meat nowadays does not pose the same hazard as it did in olden times. So we're saying that the teva's changed, and fish and meat is not as dangerous as it used to be. Still minhag avosenu v'yadenu. We don't mix fish and meat, but it's clear. I mean, you can Anan Saadi, we can see that goyim eat fish and meat together, and nothing happens to them. So it's not.
Except you're selfish.
Hmm.
Is there a difference between? Is it better to eat the fish first and then have the meat, or the meat and the fish? Doesn't matter. Either way, it doesn't matter. Okay.
No difference. No difference. It's not. It's an inyan of sakana rather than of basa b'chalav, where so it's not the moshech tam. We're not worried about moshech tam. There's something about having them together that's a problem.
You
Okay.
have to change. Would you have to change the cutlery, like the forks?
It's a good idea, because if you have a taste of one I mean, if you've been sticking your fork into the fish, and you've still got fish residue on the fork. I mean, obviously, if you take the fork, wipe it down, wash it, whatever, to make sure it's clean, then it's not an issue. It doesn't have to be a different fork. You don't have to have separate cutlery for meat and fish.
So if somebody asks today, we don't have, just to get clear again, the reason we don't eat meat and fish together is based on minhag. I was saying the other, based on a minhag, right? And that's it. That's the only reason. Because once upon a time,
it seems to be. It's it's one of these areas where you've got to somehow reconcile between what was claimed to be science in the time of the Gemara and what we have as science today. And I mean, that's a whole can of worms that we're opening up over there. Do you hold that Chazal were infallible and think they would, and it's just that, and the Teva has changed nowadays, or do we say that no, Chazal, were working with the best science they had at the time, and they paskin based on what they knew at the time? But if you feed them incorrect information, then they'll come up with incorrect psak. So I'm not gonna get into that. It's too much of a minefield. And
across the board, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, this is the minhag, and you could say this is the minhag in Klal Yisrael.
Yeah, pretty much. The Sephardim have the extra chumer that they won't eat milk with fish either.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no problem with some of the fish with worms. Like when Pesach comes, or Rosh Hashanah rather, and people want the head of a fish, and some of the
you sometimes have parasites that attach themselves to the fish.
Right, and there's some of the I can't think of the word now, went out of my head, but they won't give you hexia on some of the fish because they know that it's infested in some way.
No,
it doesn't sound appetizing, but
our version of the head of the fish on Rosh Hashanah is to take some pieces of smoked salmon and lay them out in the shape of a head.
You don't use the goat's head?
A goat's head. Oh my gosh.
Cow's head.
Cow's head. That's okay.
That used to be sold in the years ago in Beit Shemesh, in what is now the Victory supermarket, was then
Yes.
Barak.
Mhm.
And they sold it then. The Sephardim did, in fact, use a goat's head, or at least half a goat's head, with the tongue sticking out. Rather gross.
When was that for Rosh Hashanah or for the Simonim?
Which
For
half?
Shoshana,
Which half
yes.
of the goat's head? I mean, did they cut it down the middle like that?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Well, I
Yeah,
suppose, yeah. Then you can have two. Then you can put it on a plate without it rolling off. And
that's right.
That's a good test for a potential chassan.
Hey, just ate supper. For Shaul, I just ate supper, please.
That's a good test for a potential chassan. You know,
okay,
reaction.
all right. So
By
now
the
let's.
way, just one quick question, just because we spoke about it. So Sephardim won't, like when they come a bris, they won't make these milchik brisim, that have
Oh, with
bagels and
bagels,
lox,
the bagels
yeah.
and lox, yeah.
They won't.
Cream,
They're not.
bagels, the cream cheese and lox is not is actually quite you know, if you'll see on some restaurant menus, they will say for example the salmon and cream with fettuccine or whatever.
Right.
It'll have a little asterisk le noage heter
Wow.
for those who permit it. So they put a little asterisk to say, oh, hang on, if you hold like the mechaber, then you need to, then you can't have this. And there was one great photo of one of those which is mistranslated into English of driver's permit. Le noage heter is driver's permit.
Right.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
But they would have no objection to parve cheese, of course.
Of course
Right,
not.
fine.
Okay.
That was a Google translation.
It just drives me crazy that there's so many official signs in Israel where like it was just too difficult to find somebody who actually speaks English to see if that to check the translation if it's okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting sidetracked there. Sif Dalad in our chapter talks about one who eats cheese and wants to eat meat afterwards. Okay, so you've been eating cheese, now you want to eat meat afterwards. You must remove all of the leftovers of bread that were eaten with cheese from the table. It's usher to eat cheese on the same placemat that was used for meat. Okay, kol shekain, it's usher to eat to cut cheese even if it's cold with the same knife that's usually used to cut meat. Okay, and furthermore, bread that's going to be eaten with cheese is usher to cut with a knife that's used for meat. So here we're talking about the knife. The knives and the placemats. Okay, the Ramah points out that the opposite is also aser. However, after doing ne'itza b'karka, ne'itza is stabbing the earth. You take the knife and stab it into the ground 10 times. Okay, that's actually a real thing. Some people have wondered if that's actually if that's an urban legend that there's some sort of kashrus benefit to stabbing a knife into the ground, but it somehow in some places I heard of people, particularly in South Africa, I think there used to be some sort of misconception that if you had some treif plates that got ceramic that's like almost impossible to kasher, that what can you can bury them in the garden and then they'll come out okay. And I think it's a corruption of the din of neitza. That if you can do it for a knife, then you can do it for a plate. It doesn't work like that.
I think Rabbi Haber told me many years ago that there was really no hard cheese in Israel. There was no.
Yeah, so we're getting back to the thing of hard cheeses where you have to wait 6 hours. And we spoke about that last week. I think Rav Hanan said that Parmesan could be hard cheese. Yeah.
Right.
But again, if it's sprinkled into your onion soup, which is a very nice way of having Parmesan cheese, then it goes soft basically. Once it gets cooked, then it becomes soft again. It's only if you're actually eating it, chewing it, and in its raw state that you might have to be molchik for 6 hours.
So then you're saying if you put Parmesan cheese in anything that's a hot dish,
Well, once
hot
it's cooked,
food.
once I think we spoke about that in a previous year, that if you cook the cheese, then it loses that din
Yeah. Okay.
of hard cheese.
The,
Anyway,
the
so
Emmentaler cheese is not hard cheese. That's sold in
I
Israel. That's Swiss
I
cheese.
don't know Emmental so well. I'm not a cheese expert. Um, um, I just know sometimes. So, if I enjoy a cheese, I'll eat it. There was actually there's a goat farm near Beit Shemesh called Iza Paziza. They have some very nice factory tours. Which is actually quite a fun activity for the family. You go and actually make some cheese out of the goat's milk over there. And they've got a fabulous range of really delicious cheeses. If you like cheeses, they're very, very tasty. And some of them were actually pretty hard cheeses. And I ate, and I was eating them afterwards, and I thought, something, I think I'm actually now milchik. Because they did have like hard cheeses out of those, and they had been matured for a long time. So I was machmir. Anyway, talking about the knives, getting back to the knives, so the Ramah carries on and says it's a custom to use two knives and designate one of them, and the custom is to designate the mulchik knife. And one should not deviate from the custom of Israel. So, in your home, when you're making simanim on, if you got two simanim, that's great. If you've got one siman for milk and one siman for meat. But if, for example, you're doing something like tying zip ties around one set of kalim, so you can easily tell what's what, then you should put then the convention in Israel is to put the simanim on the milchik kalim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so. Now talking about the knives and tablecloths. Okay. I'm going to skip the bit about the tablecloths because I think we've already spoken enough about that when we were talking about making a heker between if you're sitting on the same table, and you can't have mulchiks and fleishiks on the same table. But if you have a heker between them, so for example, you have two different tablecloths, or if you have some sort of visually jarring thing that tells you that on this side is meat and on this side is milk, then it's all allowed. We
Yeah, I'm on
we had
the
that a while ago.
I'm on a sure.
Okay, so cutting bread. So we said that we need to use different placemats for meat and milk, and kosher can not using the same knife. So to cut bread, so using a fleshik knife to cut bread that's going to be eaten with milk. Okay. Badei Shulchan explains that different placemats are needed because the food being eaten may come into contact with a spill on the placemat. So that's why we're concerned, is that placemats, food spills. That's what's going to happen. Okay, so there's more reason to be worried with cutting bread because any meat or fat that's stuck to the knife will be rubbed onto the bread. So if you've got this knife that you just been using to cut up your meat, and now you say, okay, nice knife, let's cut up the bread as well, you're for sure going to rub meat fat onto the bread. Okay, so this is what neitza does for us. And neitza, what is the nature of the ground in the ground is hard and rough, which is basically exactly what you need to what you need in order to wipe fatty residue off a knife. So if you only have one knife in your house and you just used it for cutting open some meat, and you now ram it into the ground 10 times in different places, you can't use the same hole because then you're just widening a hole. It needs to be in a new hole and actively scraping whatever residue is off the knife. Then you come out at the end with a knife that doesn't have any meat residue on it. Now, if you find it inconvenient to go out into the garden and find a spot of your lawn and worry about whether you're going to be putting a hole in your sprinkler system, there's another alternative. Can you guess what that might be?
Bury it for 24 hours.
No. Steel wool.
Really?
Steel wool,
Huh.
absolutely. steel wool is probably better than the itzabakarka, because that's a nice rough substance. It scrapes off everything from your knife. It's a plus. That's exactly what it's designed for. Of course, the Shulchan Aruch didn't have steel wool. Okay, but if he had the steel wool, that would have been the most fabulous thing. Okay, steel wool will make sure that your knife is completely clean. So,
Regular
okay.
soap, by the way, regular dishwashing soap, you can't. It won't
See,
help.
it can help. The fact is that if you're using proper dishwashing soap and you're using hot water, the hot water melts the fat. That's an important thing. The combination of hot water and soap reducing the surface tension of the water can give you a much better cleaning effect. All in all, nowadays, honestly, there's no reason not to have more than one knife. In the old days, it was, knives were expensive. You had to, somebody had to take this piece of metal over a forge, and it was, you came home with a knife, and this was your family knife. Now it's like, knives come a dime a dozen from China. And, and there's honestly no reason not to have separate knives. But if you're in a pinch and you find yourself in a position where you've only got one knife and you just used it to cut meat, and now you want to cut your bread with it, nitza bakarka 10 times, or scrape it. Now that, by the way, that nitza bakarka is also what you can learn out if you accidentally use your knife for the wrong men. So, for example, you had a meat knife; it got into the milchika drawer, and you used it to cut some cheese. Okay. So now, aside from the question of the cheese, your knife has now got cheese residue on it. So what do? Ne'etza bakarka. Take off all the cheese residue, and then your knife is fine. Remember, it's all cold, so there's no absorption of taste if the knife wasn't hot. So just to rewind, I mean, we were speaking a little earlier about a knife used to cut onions. The only time that's a problem is if that knife was used in hot meat. If that knife was actually used to stick into a roast as it came out the oven or something like that.
Got it.
Okay. If you're just using that knife to cut cold meat or whatever, it's not the sort of knife that you would use for hot, then you don't have to worry that it was ever used with hot meat. Then that knife was never actually had a fleshika taste inside, and you've designated it as meat because you're right. You should designate it as meat because of the fatty bits that get onto the knife. And but in terms of is it actually a fleshika knife? All of your kalim that you use, like on the table almost, is all being used with food that's basically already cold. Obviously sometimes you'll put it into a kli rishon. If it's not used in a kli rishon, it doesn't absorb taste. So for example, you make a cup of coffee and you put milk into the coffee. You stir it with a teaspoon. Is that teaspoon milchik? No. Why? Because the cup of coffee is a kli sheni. Kli sheni doesn't cook. That we just have that as a principle. Even though it's hot, the taste does not actually transfer from the coffee into the teaspoon because it's a kli sheni. It's only if you take it and you're stirring the pot that it was cooked in that now absorbs taste. So that's one of the things to have in the back of your mind as to whether it's something actually has a taste in it or whether it's just that we're being machmir about having separate meat and milk, obviously, but the teaspoon. Like a milchik teaspoon will almost never actually be milchik. It's almost always like parva maker. You can eat yogurt with it. You can stir your coffee with it. You can unless it digs into the unless you actually stuck it into a kli rishon or into a davar gush, something that is hot and is a big chunk. So for example, you take a roast out the oven and you stick a knife into the roast. The roast is considered a kli rishon. because it's a big chunk of meat, whatever. Anyway, we've gone over time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave it at that, and we can carry on from there next week.
I got to run. Shka.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Good to see everybody.
Thanks everyone. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Laila
Titus.
Yeah,
Laila
Shalom.
Tom.